you have time, but we want to get things in line so that there is a receiver property, and the funding is in place to make that happen.
Mayor, I'm going to move to postpone to April the 11th this item, and then we have a few more conversations with some of the folks here tonight, see if we can work on some language, work on relocation of these, and then actually maybe even come back with a broader vision for that grading area, what we're going to do to create some preservation of the whole area.
Good.
Is that a motion to close public hearing and postpone until April 11th?
I'd say leave the public hearing open.
Good.
Motion to postpone until April 11th by Councilman Martinez, second by Councilman Tello. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Passes on a vote of 7-0. Take up item 66.
I knew this would be next.
And a number of speakers. Waiting for a staff presentation.
Mayor and Council, Rodney Gonzalez, Deputy Director for the city's Economic Growth and Redevelopment Services Office. Normally tonight, Kevin Johns would be here. Unfortunately, he's been out this week on a family emergency. With me are Ben Ramirez and Natalie Betts, also members of the National Instruments team are here. As you may recall, Mayor and Council, last week, in accordance with city policy, staff did make a public presentation on this particular project. Today is the second council meeting on this project. The first part of the item, as the Mayor mentioned, is a public hearing, and that is required by policy. Following that public hearing, there will be council deliberation and consideration. I do want to bring to your attention, and you should have a copy of this in front of you. Councilmember Togo pointed out, it's a yellow sheet of paper. In response to a question raised by Councilmember Togo, National Instruments is recommending to add a statement to the contract that reads the following: the company shall make commercially reasonable efforts to ensure that contractors and subcontractors constructing the research and development facility cover all their construction workers with workers' compensation insurance. So they are proposing, National Instruments is proposing that be added to the contract, and they are here to answer questions. Also last week, there was a question raised at the dais with regard to local hiring, and we are ready at your time to answer that question as well. So Mayor, we will turn it back over to you at this time.
Well, as we go to our speakers, we have a number of speakers signed up. How many are still here? Gus Pena, Gus Pena, David King,
Good evening, thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. My name is David King, and I live in the Zilker neighborhood. This is called an economic agreement, but I consider it corporate subsidies, corporate welfare. Corporations are essentially bidding cities and states against each other to get the highest tax subsidies possible. And if I were they, I would probably do the same thing. But I'm not, I'm a citizen, so I'm a resident. So why can't residents get the same kind of deal? I promise I won't move out of the city if you'll lower my taxes. I'll pay my taxes. I'll create jobs by spending money here in this city. So why can't citizens, get residents, get the same kind of tax deal that corporations are getting? Corporate tax subsidies are unfair to other businesses who are paying their taxes and creating jobs in this city. Austin has consistently been a fast-growing city even without corporate tax subsidies. I've lived here for over 34 years, and my taxes have increased every year except one when the Texas legislature passed property tax reform. If the goal of corporate tax subsidies is to bring in new taxpayers and help minimize tax increases, when will current taxpayers see any tax benefits? What we see is higher density, more traffic congestion, more concrete, higher taxes, more commercialization of parks and neighborhoods. A 2010 study done by Father and Associates found that in Austin, the infrastructure costs, schools, parks, roads, and water, for a typical new housing unit was $25,683. Of that amount, $23,388 is paid by taxpayers and ratepayers that are already here, not by the new development itself. taxpayers and ratepayers already pay 91% of the development costs. We cannot afford to give corporations more tax subsidies for economic development. You can help our schools, our parks, our roads, our utility infrastructure laws by making development pay for itself instead of giving more corporate tax subsidies. Thank you.
Scott Johnson, Will McLeod.
Well. National Instruments wants a handout. I want a handout too. Where do I sign up? My father's a small business owner, and small business owners drive the community of Austin. National Instruments is a big corporation, and I believe they also, what do they do? They, don't they make these cable scrambler boxes or something? Well, if you're going to give them corporate welfare, why not let us have a break? Let us be able to buy our own cable boxes. I believe National Instruments does make the cable TV scramblers. They also make us a lot of electronics. But to give away these incentives is ridiculous. Please stop hurting us, taxpayers. We don't want to go somewhere else to do our shopping and do our and we're going to end up that way because our rents are too high. $850 a month rent's not good enough for us. Huh? Maybe we need to have $1,000 a month. This is ludicrous. This is silly. So many things the city could spend that money on. Street widening, sidewalks, pothole repair, bus service, competitive bus service. There are so many things we could be spending our money on instead of tax giveaways and loopholes. The hammer's coming down. I was reading in the Austin Bulldog about an article, and it's not nice. It doesn't look pretty. And I want to know how much more the city's going to be planning more on these corporate giveaways to these big corporations, and if there's any campaign contributions involved. Campaign contributions that have not been disclosed. That's the question. Hopefully, we can get an answer. Thank you.
Bob Bagley.
Thank you for hearing me. I'm Bob Batlin, Austin Interfaith and Middle Shalom. I have to say, based on this afternoon session, I am one of those people that represents a nonprofit that has an agenda. Thank you to the Special Committee on Economic Incentives for making clear that the City of Austin is committed to bringing good jobs to our city. The Special Committee focused on a number of factors for applicants for incentives. Among them were a wage floor, prevailing wage, safety training, workers' compensation, and workforce development. We thank National Instruments for agreeing to voluntarily comply with wage floor and prevailing wage recommendations and others. It is noteworthy that the proposed agreement includes both provisions. It was originally not clear if workers' compensation was to be included. It didn't seem reasonable that the city and National Instruments would consciously omit those important provisions. Evidently, National Instruments is willing to consider workmen's compensation provisions. It's a little bit troubling that I don't, as a non-lawyer, know what the words really mean. But anyway, it is a positive step. An ordinance based upon the recommendations of the Special Committee would eliminate the need for these kind of 11th hour negotiations, making the process clear, defined, repeatable, transparent, and fair call. Thank you.
Chairman Chagall?
Good evening, Council. Aaron Chapel with the Laborers Union. Second some of Bob Allen's sentiments there with Austin Interfaith, that we think this is great. This company is acting in good faith there to endorse living wage and prevailing wage. Do you think we need to, as quickly as possible, expedite this policy process that we're happy to see workers' comp included safety provisions? So I think there's room to gain on training opportunities and to make sure that we have good enforcement language. And they seem to be acting in good faith, so I hope that this living wage and prevailing wage are taken seriously on this project. But we'd really like to see that policy move along a year or two, welcome the next company that comply with all the terms of the policy. So thank you.
Lana Stone?
Good evening, council members and Mayor Leffingwell. My name is Lana Stone. I'm a teacher at Go Valley Elementary in East Austin at Springdale Airport area, as you probably know. I wanted to speak about my school and my community's involvement with the first Lego League competition, which is part of the larger program that FIRST sponsors, and FIRST stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology. This was our first year to be involved with the FIRST organization through the first Lego League competition. I was privileged to be coaching 5th graders, 10 of them, to the competition. This was our first year, as I said, my first year as a coach. And as such, I was fortunate enough to be offered a mentor through National Instruments. And without this mentor, we would not have been nearly as successful. My team was able to not only attend the first round of the tournament, but we did well enough to be invited to the Invitational, which was the championship event for the Central Texas region. And the students, we had a lot of fun, which is one of the tenets of the FIRST organization. But more importantly, these students have learned a whole lot about science, technology, engineering, and math. Excuse me. They say that science and math are their favorite subjects now, and they plan to continue doing robotics in middle school and high school. So I know that without National Instruments involvement, we just wouldn't have, as a rookie coach, I wouldn't have known what to do. So I appreciate them for providing me a mentor. I also know that they're involved with Scope Point Alliance. Scope Point Alliance puts on the tournaments. They offer all kinds of support to this organization, FIRST organization. National Instruments also gives scholarships to teams that want to attend the tournaments. They gave my team $500, which to be part of these competitions is expensive. The materials are expensive, the tournament fees are expensive. So not only do I have the support of my principal, I have support from National Instruments with monetary and personnel. My students grew a lot through this process. One of my students, I never heard her speak before. I was her music teacher for 2 years before I took on this role of STEM specialist. And I never heard the student speak, but then she got on the robotics team, and she, by the time the tournament came, she was up in front of the judges, speaking her line, the skit, with confidence and pride. So this experience changed her life and changed the life of 10 students in my life too. So thank you to National Instruments.
Dave Porter?
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Dave Porter with the Greater Austin Chamber. I'll be very brief. 80% of all the jobs created here in the Austin area are created by local companies, and it's quite an honor that a local homegrown success story like National Instruments is considering growing, expanding, or adding 1,000 new jobs. Having a policy in place that's flexible to allow local companies to take advantage of these incentives is really a sign of a good policy. Again, being flexible enough to include local companies to take advantage of these incentives is a good thing. So thank you for your consideration, and this is a great project for Austin. Thank you.
Kayvon Saburian.
Good evening, council. I realized after I spoke the last time, it might have seemed as if we had something personal against National Instruments because of my opposition to how they were written, and I just wanted to make sure that they understood that we didn't. And as a gesture of goodwill, I brought up some cookies, as you can see. For the record, they were made by Tooth Treats, though. But in any case, when National Instrument moves to Austin, not only will be able to buy all the cookies that they want, they'll also enjoy all the great services that the people who work for the city of Austin provide. They won't have to pay the same that other businesses do. And we've had a long discussion, like many other cities before us, about what makes sure that that deal is a benefit for Austin. I commend the mayor for beating the drum about the importance of jobs. I commend Councilmember Togo, Councilmember Morrison for making sure that the taxpayers don't get a double dip because of, by including living wage. I commend Councilmember Martinez for bringing up prevailing wage so construction jobs and construction projects are done in a good way. I commend Councilmember Cole for thinking about hard to employ, Councilmember Spellman for making sure that our city gets a deal that's as good or better than other cities. But the system is broken that we have right now. We saw that with Home Depot. We saw that with the Marriott. Sometimes the cities just get too big that the old system isn't good enough to deal with the same problems or potential problems that might have occurred before. Right now, this deal says that if there's a wage problem, CMD staff is supposed to deal with it. That's 1.05C. There's now almost 10,000 jobs that CMD staff is supposed to monitor and regulate on top of their normal responsibilities. Let's join other cities like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that have passed ordinances. We've talked about this longer than other cities had to come to an ordinance. There's been a small committee that it's now been a couple months, has recommended the passage of an ordinance, the terms. The city staff has written a memorandum. I've met with city staff who would rather have the details laid out in paper instead of here's CMD staff, just deal with it if there's a wage problem. CMD staff is already changing the way that they deal with wage complaints in state prevailing wage cases. It can be a very easy thing to include this and that. So again, as an attorney who has to deal with the actual enforcement of when there are disputes, rather than the only option being, okay, there's a dispute between the developer and the city about whether the developer did their job, and the only option is what I call the nuclear bomb option, which is, we're going to go sue you on the contract if you don't comply with making sure this one guy got paid. Let's just have a middle ground here where there's a way to deal with that, with those issues.
Thank you. Tamara Hudgens.
Council, Mrs. Hutchins had this earlier, but she did want to submit her testimony.
Thank you. You can pass down. Monique Johnson-Jones. Not so fast.
Ms. Jones had to leave also. We said Johnson, so I submitted her testimony as well.
Okay, noting that both Tamara Hutchins and Monique Johnson-Jones are for. Greg Kazar.
Good evening again, council members.
Excuse me, Greg, is Amulfo Enriquez here?
I don't think so. I think he
All right, see you.
most of the points I wanted to make have already been made, but I did want to bring up one point that I thought was highlighted very well today in the Austin Chronicle, which is that these deals look like they are getting better. And we've been talking about them for a long time and have been pushing to be at a better negotiating position for a long time. And it looks like the city has been negotiating these deals harder. We've been getting a lot of the values that we wanted to get out of it. So regardless of which side of the economic incentives argument people are on, whether we should be doing it or not, regardless, it looks like the deals that are coming forward are bringing better community benefits, are paying the wages that we were expecting, and are unlocking more of our community values. And so I really appreciate National Instruments for having come to the table on this, but also really want to recognize the hard work that the community has done, and also the Special Committee on Economic Incentives chaired by Councilmember Martinez, I think has really made some normative shifts in the way that we're talking about incentive deals. And so whether you guys vote them up or down, I hope that at least what you're looking at looks like it's looking better, and I think that policy will eventually sort of seal our negotiating stance that somewhere was a little bit tougher. We're going to move on these deals. And it will also make sure that we don't have little holes accidentally like the workers' comp hole. Cindy Jimenez, one of our worker members, is going to speak really briefly on that point right after myself. But thank you all so much for working so hard on this. We really appreciate it and have this. So thank you again.
Cindy Jimenez.
Good evening, Council. I'm Cindy Jimenez, and I'm a student. I graduated 18th High School in 2011, and I want to share a story of what happened in my family a couple of years ago. I'm a daughter of a construction worker here in Austin. He was working on a work site, and he felt a two-story roof on a rainy day. His workers, his partners, or people that were working on the site, notified his employer. His employer didn't call an ambulance or anything. What he did, he decided to go drop him off at his apartment. Later on, he told his employees to drop my dad at a hospital room. My dad was diagnosed with 3 ruptured discs, and he was told that he needed surgery in order to walk again. Later on, the doctors decided that the surgery wasn't going to be necessary, but he had to wear a immobilizer for 6 months in order to help his back. Even though he needed that time to recovery, he was the one who needed to go work in order to pay the bills for us. At that moment, he went to work after 3 months of being in that accident. Also, my mom had to work double in order to provide help for the family. I believe that it's really important to have workers' comp and for our workers here in Austin. And we really want to thank National Instruments for coming out and paying a good wage, but it's also important that they cover all their workers here with workers' comp. And I just want to say this, and this is really important for families out there, so they don't have to go through this like I did. Thank you.
Okay, came on Sabrina and already spoken, so we're just up to 3 minutes. Sis Myers here. Clay Defoe. You have 3 minutes on this topic of this incentive agreement.
You're considering an item to give National Instruments, sir, up to $1.7 million. Now, this city council can bully facts out of me. I'd rather present them on my own will. I think you guys hear them. But I haven't heard a shred of fact from your bureaucrats about this deal, and I haven't heard many facts in the testimony. I'm afraid you guys fly off emotion instead of facts. I'm here to bring you some facts on this one, sir. This deal is authorized under Chapter 380 of the Texas Local Government Code. Chapter 380. That sounds familiar. Now, I know I've been speaking to y'all for about 2 years now, consistently, and I know you probably don't like it. But, the Texas Local Government Code was created in 1997 by the state of Texas. And I guess you're in good company because the people who helped create it were George W. Bush and Rick Perry. So I hear all this stuff about we're Democrats and all that, but you work for the same team, which are the developers and corporate interests. I'd like to see a politician or someone stand up for Austin that cares about local business, because local business is what makes the city thrive, and it's, I think, what makes us unique compared to other cities in Texas, and we don't want to lose that, sir. Now, I think that we need to look at their claims here. The supposed investment being $80 million and 1,000 jobs. It sounds great, doesn't it? But I don't see you scrutinizing any of these claims. You take what they claim to be truth. And the first act of any good journalist or any good attorney or any good lawman or lawwoman is to scrutinize the claims and hold them to muster. This is based on a firm-based incentive matrix, which remains undefined in what you're giving out there. I found the draft resolution extremely disturbing. It reminds me a lot of when you gave $1.8 million to Visa a few months ago, like they need the money. $8 million to Apple, $8.5 million in 2012. $250 million to Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, a billionaire, in 2011. And the U.S. Fair thing in December 2011, you did the same actions under Chapter 380 of the Local Government Code. This is an abuse of power. It's wrong. It's going to impoverish our city. Look out on the streets. We have homeless people starving. Why don't we spend the money on helping the homeless?
And be not
You care
bad.
so much about preserving. Why don't you create a historical preservation program? It's not going to happen because y'all are in the pockets of the developers and the corporate interests, like most big city councils across the nation. Now, the maximum amount they can receive is $1,667,575. It's wrong, and I want to thank you for that wonderful gift you gave me on the last item. Now I have a potential another lawsuit against all of you. Thank you.
Jim O'Quinn.
Good evening. Jim O'Quinn with Our Lady of Motive Bay Catholic Church. I'm a member of Austin Interfaith. Austin Interfaith represents about 30 institutions here in the city and about 50,000 citizens in the city of Austin. And I just wanted to thank the management of National Instruments, the hard work done by the Austin Chamber of Commerce and City Council for using economic incentive deals to bring good jobs to Austin. We realize the vast majority of the economic incentive deals that come through are a net benefit to the taxpayer. They're not a net deficit, they're a net benefit to the taxpayer. And I think we're already starting to see some of the results from the special committee of economic incentive that was put together by Councilmember Martinez, since the bills are a lot less stressful and full of tension as they were in the past. So I think this is a good example of when the city's values are merged with the community's values and merged with business. That we put together these good bills that are a net benefit to the city and to the citizens, and they create good jobs. So thank you.
Okay, those are all the speakers that we have. Councilmember Martinez moves to close the public hearing and approve the ordinance on all three readings.
Second.
Second by Mayor Pro Tem Cole. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Spelman.
After the discussion of this last week, I asked the EGRSO staff if they could investigate a question for me, which had arisen in the previous public hearing. The question was whether it makes any difference that this particular employer, National Instruments, is going to hire the vast majority of its new hires outside the city limits. As you all know, as we all know, and some of the speakers appear to have known, we only do Chapter 380 agreements if these are net positive for the Austin taxpayers, meaning that if we do the deal, we will bring in more money in revenues than we have to pay out in services, which means we have more money available to spend on current residents to improve services or perhaps to reduce taxes. That's what the Web Loci analysis is supposed to do for us. I was concerned that that may not be completely accurate in the event that we're dealing with an organization that is hiring most of these people from outside the city limits. And Rodney, if you could explain to me how Web Loci deals with that.
It certainly can, Councilmember. You're being handed out a presentation. This will be very brief. There are only 3 slides to respond to that question. And to your point, the net benefit for this particular project is $7.1 million. If you look at item 66. Thank you. First slide. There it is. And what we've done is we've encapsulated that question, which is, does a project that hires fewer local residents result in a larger number of new residents coming into the Austin area? And the way that we can explain this, and we talked about, I personally talked to Dr. Robert Land, who developed this tool from Georgia Tech. All these projects that we bring before you that create new jobs to the Austin economy result in a like number of new area residents coming into Austin. And that's regardless of the estimated percentage of local hiring. And those new residents, those new area residents are created through either what's called a job change effect or through direct hiring from outside the local area. Now I'm going to use a term that the Austin Chronicle used this morning, which is new neighbors coming into Austin. And so what I've done is I've encapsulated that into this small little matrix so that way you can see the new area residents as a result of a specific project. So first you have the job change effect, and we'll look at that example column of 35% local hiring, which is being presented to you today. As a result of the job change effect, there will be 350 new residents to Austin because of this project. The presumption there is because someone who has a job locally will be hired by National Instruments, thereby creating a job vacancy. Following that job vacancy, ultimately there will be a new resident coming into the Austin area. In terms of the 65%, as Councilmember Stone has mentioned, we will get new neighbors, i.e. meaning that there will be new residents coming into Austin. That's 654, a total of 1,000. Now, if you look at an example of 100% local hiring, if National Instruments said we can hire the talent locally, through the job chain effect, you would still end up with 1,000 new residents coming into the Austin area, because as I mentioned previously, hiring a local resident leaves then a vacancy for that job that they have to leave, and down the road, ultimately, there is a new resident to fill in those job vacancies. So as you can see, whether it's 35% or whether it's 100%, the presumption is through the job change effect and through new neighbors coming in, that you still end up with 1,000 new area residents over that time period. And National Instruments will be hiring these 1,000 new jobs over a 10-year period. So it's not like you're going to get 650 new neighbors in year one. So the next slide then is how do we then compute new residents versus non-residents of those total area residents. So of the total area residents, WebLoci will compute an estimate of new city residents, and it calculates the revenue generated and the costs to support those new residents. And that's what's reflected in the major category WebLoci report. Based on the census data that we have, 60% of these new area residents will reside within the city. So in this case, 1,000 new area residents, as I mentioned, and it doesn't matter with regard to their percentage of local hiring, you will ultimately receive 1,000 new area residents. 600 will reside in the city, 400 will be non-residents. And what WebLoci focuses on primarily are the revenues generated by those 600 city residents and the cost to support those 600 city residents. This is the last slide to further illustrate that point. So when National Instruments, and this is that box at the top, pays salaries to both city residents and non-residents, we look at the revenues from the city residents, primarily new households being created from those new residents, who will pay property taxes. Those new residents will pay user charges and fees, and those new residents will purchase local goods and services and pay sales taxes. Non-residents will also purchase local goods and services, and they will pay sales taxes. So this is the revenue capture, and as far as the expense is concerned for WebLoci, we look at the city resident side, what it costs to support those new city residents. So I hope that that explains the question that was raised last week.
It does to my satisfaction, but let me see if I can summarize it. Because the assumption you're making is 1,000 new jobs mean 1,000 new people will move to town.
Yes.
Ultimately, maybe not today or tomorrow, when that job comes up, even if we hire locally, that leads to a vacancy, which may be hired locally, which leads to a vacancy, which sooner or later is going to have to be hired by somebody new from outside the system.
Yes.
Sooner or later, those 1,000 new jobs are going to result in 1,000 people moving to town.
Yes.
Okay. The implicit assumption in that then is that if we wanted to use Chapter 3 of the agreements as a means of, for example, reducing our unemployment rate, the assumption we're making here to stimulate our web loci analysis is that's not going to work. That because every job is eventually going to be hired from somebody who's not inside the system right now, is coming from outside, and therefore that Chapter 3 of the agreements can't possibly reduce our unemployment rate, at least in the long run. I would agree that that's probably true in the long run, but in the short run, I suspect the situation may be a little bit better than that. It may take 2 or 3 years. We may see a reduction in unemployment, especially associated with something like Verithane, which is hiring people who are currently fairly marginal workers. Those marginal workers are particularly likely now to be unemployed or severely underemployed, and we may actually see some sort of reduction in our unemployment rate associated with that kind of job. So that's better than what it is that you're assuming here, and I think that's all really good. You're making a very conservative assumption.
Yes.
Given the very conservative assumptions you're making, basically no unemployment effect at all, then you're coming up with a net improvement of $7 million over a 10-year period.
Yes, $7.1 million.
$7.1 million. The only thing which I think we may need to do think harder about in the future, I don't feel the need to think harder about for this particular project, but in the future, I can imagine there may be an effect of different patterns of living inside the city and therefore paying taxes and receiving services, and living outside the city, perhaps just outside the city, around Robert View or someplace like that, based on the location of the firm itself. And that a firm located downtown, due to the usual commuting patterns, is more likely to have people living inside the city. And one located right in the city limits and around Robert View or someplace else is maybe 50-50, living inside the city, living just outside the city. Is this something which we've considered taking that into account?
You know, that's something that we've looked at, especially in light of the recent policy discussions that have been held, especially in terms of how do we incentivize more central city type of employment, specifically downtown. You know, we have an effort, of course, to encourage downtown vitality, specifically downtown residents, downtown employment, to support downtown. And so we've taken a look at that under that assumption that you just stated, which is that when you have employment more towards the center area of downtown, it does likely lead to higher local residency within the city, as opposed to, as you mentioned, perhaps on the fringe of the city limits. So we've taken a look at that, and we certainly may consider something like that in the future with regard to the level of incentives, perhaps a bonus of some sort or something like that, under the premise of encouraging downtown employment or more central city employment. But, you know, the things that we're faced with, of course, are the cost of being downtown or central to the city as opposed to the cost of being outside of the downtown area. So there are cost factors that these companies also have to consider in that equation.
And it seems to me that's a second order effect that might be something which we can consider in future deals, but this seems perfectly reasonable. And once you explained to me what the assumptions of the web loci analysis were, I was surprised to find I hadn't thought of that already, and I was surprised to find that $7 million was a lot sounder figure than I expected. So we can summarize this as through a payment of $1.7 million, which would be more than matched by the state's Emerging Technology Fund in this particular case. By paying $1.7 million in dribs and drabs over the next 10 years, we will be bringing in a net of $7 million into the city coffers, which we can use to reduce taxes or to improve services to our current residents.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Rodney.
I have a quick comment, and I want to belabor this point as we go over it. It seems like every time issues like this come up. But I consistently hear the comment, and having even heard it tonight, and we're spending this money, giving this money to a corporation, and we could be spending it on something else, whether it be housing or or any other project, public safety, parks, et cetera. But the fact is, if we didn't approve this agreement, then we couldn't spend that money on something else because it wouldn't be there. This money comes from that agreement. In fact, on every agreement that we've done, under this type of analysis, every agreement that I've done since I've been on this council, the city makes money on them. At the end of the day, there's a profit. So we're not spending money on these, we're making money on this agreement and all the others. I know that's, it's like somebody said one time, I can explain it to you, but I can't make you understand. And it seems to me that that's the case in this situation.
You're absolutely right. If National Instruments says I'm expanding here, we will not have that $7.1 million.
Councilor Morrison.
Rodney, thank you for getting that other information. That's exactly the question that I was asking last time. That was, can't we go back? But it's interesting because I think that there's been a misstatement, a misunderstanding, because what I had understood was that the 60% figure was an assumption of how many were local hires. You're telling me that what LOCI is assuming that 60% of the 1,000, whatever number, are going to be living in the city. That's the 60%. They don't have anything inside their black box that assumes that 60% will be local hires.
Yes, their assumption right now is 35%, and that first slide that I showed you was, regardless of the percent of local hiring, we ultimately will have 1,000 new area residents.
Yes, right. So there's no assumption inside their black box about what percent they're hiring, because the answer is independent of that.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I think that's really additional good information to add to this conversation, because maybe we weren't getting it quite right before. That's very important. But I do believe that if this were a different environment, if this were 2001 or 2002, and we had a lot of unemployed engineers, then that unemployment effect could well play a significant part, but that's not the issue.
That is not the issue.
That's not the issue. Okay. And then I do just want to, and so thank you for doing that work. I do just want to mention that I think one thing that we all need to be thinking about, of course, we're going to start thinking about where these companies are located, because I've been to visit a couple of the companies that have gotten 380 agreements way far north on the very edge of town, and many of their employees do not live in the city of Austin, of course. It's going to be spread out. But if what you mentioned, are there incentives that we can be looking at a way to draw them to downtown? Well, now that we've adopted Imagine Austin, we really want to have job centers in various areas around town, so maybe we ought to think a little more broadly about how we can actually bring jobs to those activity centers.
That's absolutely correct, and that's the other point, is we are focused on those activity centers as well, specifically those that intersect with public transportation.
Good idea. Thank you.
Councilmember Riley.
I couldn't resist picking up on that note. It's a particular interest of mine, but all of our incentive deals always want to look at transit options that are available. And it so happens this side actually that's a fairly good location with respect to transit and other options. Right now, there is a fairly nice connection under MOPAC over to the Domain, which is currently served by 466 rail connector over to the Breaker rail station. And we are working on making the Domain the northern terminus of the 803 West Rapid Transit line, which is expected to start service next year, meaning that workers at the National Instruments would have the option of accessing the site using that West Rapid Transit service. There's also actually very nice bicycle pedestrian connections by way of a green belt immediately adjacent to the National Instruments site that provides connections both to the northwest, to some apartment complexes and neighborhoods over there, and then to the northeast. There's actually a passage under Duval Road over to Balcones District Park, where we will soon get to work on the new Northern Walnut Creek Trail, which will provide a connection ultimately all the way down through East Austin. So there's actually a wealth of travel options that will be available to the workers, the new workers that we are getting there in National Instruments. I understand there actually is very active cycling community already at the National Instruments, and I'm looking forward to working with them and others in the area to improve the options that are there. So I think it's important that we all consider all of those things as we add jobs in Austin and think about options and be sure that there is a future where not everyone will necessarily have to be adding to the traffic on MOPAC. There will be other options available so that they can, for those that choose those. And we are currently seeing a growing number choose those every year. So appreciate all the work that has gone into this, and I appreciate the willingness of National Instruments to work together on improving all the options that are available.
Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember Tobin first, and you.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to very briefly add my thanks to that of the communities to National Instruments for coming forward and voluntarily offering to meet some of the provisions that we talked about on our economic incentive subcommittee. It was very critical, I think, that you honor the wage floor and prevailing wage provision that we've been discussing, as well as the workers' compensation. So thank you for recognizing that that's an important community value and voluntarily coming forward. And then I also just want to comment on really that I think it's a great benefit to our community and to the students who are coming up to hear about the kind of, for you to sponsor the kind of work you do with younger Austinites. In particular, I'm very impressed by the work that you do to encourage youth of all ages in the science and math field. And I'm really impressed that Ms. Stone was here today to talk about that experience as well. It's one thing to hear from National Instruments about their programs. The fact that Ms. Stone stayed here for hours all day because she found that experience so powerful and wanted to speak to it was, I found to be very valuable. So thank you very much for the work that you do to encourage the next generation of employees.
Mayor Pro Tem Cole.
Ronnie, you spoke a little, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was at a luncheon this week and I understood that this is becoming an increasing problem. That is, we find good employers willing to pay good wages and have a good return on investment, and also invest otherwise in our community. We're having a location problem. And you said that you wanted to try to concentrate on activity centers, and I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
As was mentioned and as envisioned in Imagine Austin, what we're talking about from the city perspective is developing compact and connected centers. Those centers have access to jobs, they have access to schools, access to
So you're
healthcare
talking about the
facilities.
activity centers in Imagine Austin?
Yes, that's what we're talking about, is driving employment towards those activity centers so that way they're complete and connected centers. Downtown is, of course, a large activity center. You have other activity centers that have been identified in Imagine Austin. But when we reference drawing jobs towards those nodes, that's in keeping with Imagine Austin.
And then I have one question of the National Instrument representative. Is there anyone here?
Yes. Several.
It doesn't matter.
Mayor, Jim, my name is David Keefe, with the National Instruments.
Hello, David. Good to see you. I wanted to ask you about your charitable contribution policy. We always want to make sure when we are giving incentives, or whether it's a local company or a company coming from somewhere else, that they are going to invest in our community. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can, and also I think Mark will be great. But we have a very strong community from the employees themselves, as well as from the company, and we're matching their contributions to all the other charities of their choice. And so it's a very proactive community intent like a choice of employees themselves.
Is there a wide range of areas, education?
It's numerous.
Yeah, our employees, my name is Mark Kramer, Vice President of Human Resources. Our employees, a lot of stuff is employee driven. And so our employees are following the passion, and we encourage them to get involved, and then the company tends to follow those passions demonstrated by employees. Through our charitable giving every year, our employees this last year raised over $800,000. We have a company match up to $1,000 a year. Our employees are using that for education, for their own personal passions. When you see our people out in the first, and then when they're out there with the students making a difference one-on-one, we do that part of getting back to them.
That would consider participating in such activity, that their insurance would not be valid if they use their car in commercial capacity.
I have another question for you while you're here. Can you help me understand your concerns about the ordinance, about the resolution before us today? What, do you feel that this sends a message to, I heard your concerns about the use.
Fantastic.
And the way, and the cease and desist and the enforcement, but how do you feel the resolution before us plays into that discussion?
So as I stated to you, we're happy to participate in the discussions. We don't want it miscommunicated that because the city is discussing the issue, that illegal operators can continue to provide and promote these illegal services in the city of Austin, putting public safety at threat.
I see. And do you feel that there's a risk of that with this resolution, that might send that kind of a message to the community that use is, or that particular kind of service is a legal one?
No, which is why I asked for a commitment from the city to communicate to the public that, yes, obviously the city of Austin is open to discussion. It's part of our process, and there's a process in place for all modes of businesses that come to town. So we're open to the process and having a discussion. But in addition to that, to use the power of the press and the media to make sure that people are informed that we're not encouraging this type of illegal activity, and that there are ordinances in place that the city transportation department has that they can utilize to make sure that folks are not providing these types of illegal services.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
And I have a question for you too. Reading this letter, it kind of leads me to maybe to the next step. If the driver's insurance is invalidated by using it for this purpose, people in the car might be at risk too, because they would not be eligible to be covered by insurance either. Is that right? And then if the city of Austin has sanctioned this whole process, we're at least in part, it would seem to me, responsible in case there were an accident, people could not recover their hospital bills, et cetera, as a result of not being covered by insurance and being in an accident.
Mayor Leffenwell, I believe that to be 100% correct, and it's a significant part of the reason why the transportation industry itself is regulated, so that the city can confirm that those.
So to take it to the next step, if you were to address that problem and say, okay, so we have to, these have to be considered commercial vehicles now in order for their insurance to cover what they're doing, then they would in fact be cabs, wouldn't they?
Yes, sir, they would.
And that involves a whole other process that's scary to contemplate.
Just want to comment briefly as the lead sponsor on this item. I think Mr. Cargo is absolutely right that there is a real risk of miscommunication and misunderstanding around the kind of services that we're talking about here, and as is in the resolution. Austinites are currently sharing rides using these apps. Austin's transportation code does not currently explicitly address and regulate ride sharing. And it is conceivable that ride sharing could serve a particular niche in the spectrum of transportation services if regulated so as not to overlap with existing transportation options. So what the resolution does, and this is the resolve part of the resolution where we really get to what we're doing here, it says the city manager is directed to explore ride-sharing regulations in other cities and make recommendations on the parameters within which ride-sharing should be allowed in the city of Austin. The recommendation should address, but not be limited to, insurance, registration, and license requirements, criminal and driving background checks for drivers, the method of connecting drivers to riders, and cost-sharing parameters. The city manager is directed to bring the recommendations and any proposed ordinance back to council by June 1st of this year. The idea is simply to explore this issue thoroughly, see what's going on in other cities, see what we need to do to address all the concerns that have been raised, and come back and take action on it. I don't think it does anybody any good just to look the other way and pretend these things aren't happening. They are happening. We need to step up, talk about them, and figure out how ride-sharing alternatives ought to be regulated, whether they should be allowed, and if so, what parameters we should set on their operation, and what regulations we need to put in place to make sure that citizens of Austin and the users of these services are appropriately protected. So.
Yep, where is it?
Alrighty, we're trying to stop the illegal activity and holding a debate over this. That's by state law. There are 11 million illegal aliens in this country, and we're not even deporting them. But however, we can impede on a service such as Hayride, from what I'm understanding, that offers, or a business that offers sidecars. It seems to be like this is not the answer. The answer is to go to the legislator and let's reform some of the insurance codes. From what I'm understanding, if Clay takes me home and I pay him money, under this proposal, that would make that illegal. We have better things to do with our times. I got a solution. The solution's simple. We need to encourage our state lawmakers to start amending our insurance code. My mom works for an insurance company, so I know a little bit about liability. And there's the fact that we do pay uninsured motorists, so the money does come from somewhere. And let's have a disclaimer on these sidecars saying, this is a sidecar. Here are the consequences, and you accept the risk. As a libertarian, I support such a notion because that would encourage personal responsibility instead of government tyranny. And tyranny is all over the city. Permitting fees are so expensive, we're worried about the formula. You know what? I think the formulas cause more harm than good. And I think it's lined Lone Star Cab's pockets and Yellow Cab's pockets. More than it has, what was that other cab company? Austin Cab. Yes, Austin Cab is always getting the raw end of the stick, short end of the stick. We need to have more competition. Not monopolies, bureaucracies, duopolies, and triopolies. And I would oppose this and encourage you to contact your state elected officials. Let's put some changes in the insurance code. And let's promote competition. Thank you.
William Crowe.
Good evening, Councilmember Riley. Government is so short-sighted. It would be really funny, folks, except the fact that it's predicated on violence. And I believe this ordinance, this initiative, this resolution presents the same problem that we see over and over and over again with this city council. It goes back to a speech that was given in January 2012 when Citizen John Bush described the gun in the room. The gun in the room is not leaving anytime soon. Because that's all government knows is force. I hear a lot of aphorisms thrown out here. I like to deal in facts. I have a legal mind, as you probably know by now. You know, I've worked in a law firm. I ran for mayor of Austin in 2012 against His Highness, who can't seem to listen to citizens. And I don't like all this talk about the illegal activity, like they're running drugs or trying to kill or murder people. You know, I know you guys don't like hearing from me. You'd probably be happy if I was dead. But this is not an issue of public safety. I hear all this militarized rhetoric in our city council about public safety. We have to protect the public safety. We have to protect our representatives from a citizen who may have a different opinion from theirs. We have to protect our police over protecting the rights of our citizens in the case of Antonio Beeler. I hear this over and over in the guise of public safety. We don't have to look further than the feds to find that out. Look at the Patriot Act and what rights are being shredded. And I believe this violates my right to start a carpool if I want.
Right.
You know, the Bobcat tram, that thing's $16 to get down to San Marcos. Students can't afford that.
Gonna be canceled.
That's right. So what we need to do is get back to being with our neighbors and starting grassroots economic development.